I grew up in Bradford, Pennsylvania. Have any of you ever heard of Zippo lighters? They're from here. A thick forest surrounds the town, along with most of the neighborhoods. My family lives sort of on the outskirts of Bradford. Of course, much like the town itself, our house was also surrounded by forest. If you took in the scene from our back porch, you would see nothing but sprawling trees for miles. I tell you this so you can gain a sense of isolation. Out at my house, you could scream at the top of your lungs, and no one would come to help you. This happened back in the summer of 1996. I was 11 years old at the time. I had a childhood friend named Marty, who was the same age. Our fathers worked together and knew each other well. He would come over almost every Friday to hang out. Marty and I found ourselves hiking through the trees as we often did. However, we were feeling a bit daring and went further into the forest than we usually did. There was this barrier of trees that we would never go past, simply because I didn't know the area beyond that point. We continued past the barrier into uncharted territory. We eventually came upon a clearing. In the middle of this clearing was an old, disheveled-looking tent. Being the curious young men we were, we of course had to see inside. As we approached, I could feel the temperature around me drop. I'm no stranger to the cold, but this was in the middle of summer. Even at my age, I could sense that there was something truly sinister inside this tent. A part of me was screaming to hightail it out of there, but my own curiosity pushed me forward. We both stopped just outside the tent, and suddenly, we were both too frightened to move any further. We were both frozen in place, staring at the open flap of the tent as it swayed from side to side. The sky seemed to grow even darker since we discovered this tent, and though we were standing directly in front of it, we could not see inside. What happened next is the reason that I still struggle with alcoholism. A dark hand slowly emerged from the tent's opening. It reached out to us, with long black nails protruding out from its fingertips. I'm not ashamed to admit that I pissed myself out of fear. The hand slowly turned and made a beckoning gesture with its index finger, and that's when Marty and I heard a deep, bellowing laughter from inside the tent. I don't remember much about what happened after that. I just remember me and Marty running for our lives, tearing through the woods and back to my house. I do have a vague memory of me briefly looking behind me as I ran, to see a tall, dark, and human figure standing just outside the tent. Upon returning, Marty immediately called his mom to come pick him up. My mother asked us what was wrong, and we both explained to her that we saw some kind of creature in the forest. My mother ultimately dismissed our claims, but led us in a prayer while we waited for Marty's mom to arrive. Marty never came back after that, and we sort of drifted apart. Sadly, Marty began hanging out with the wrong crowd and began doing hardcore drugs when he was around 14. He ended up hanging himself in his bedroom when he was 17. As for myself, I suffered from severe night terrors that tormented me for years after that day in the woods. I'm not going to get into what I experienced in my nightmares, but I will say that I became an alcoholic as a result. After moving far away and attending numerous AA meetings, I'm glad to say that I've turned my life around, and I even have a family of my own. I still visit Bradford every now and again to check in on my aging parents. Whenever I'm there, I always set flowers on Marty's grave. I'm still convinced that what we saw that day in the woods contributed to his death. Now that I have some perspective, I think what Marty and I encountered was a demonic presence. It followed us home and proceeded to turn both of our lives upside down. There were rumors of people worshiping Satan out there in those woods around the mid to late 90s. Perhaps they awakened something, and Marty and I just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. This is going to be a long story, but to understand how all this started, I have to start from the beginning. I'm a happily married 28-year-old female. I have been with my husband since August of 2012. The summer before I met him, I was dabbling into some pretty dark stuff. I was studying witchcraft, reading tarot cards, and playing with Ouija boards. I'm no longer into that stuff, and I became a Christian. However, the consequences of my actions would later come back to haunt me. Being 19 at the time, I was in over my head. But as they say, curiosity killed the cat. I ended up performing an incantation. I'm not going to go into detail about what the spell was for personal reasons, but let's just say it worked. But like everything that deals with magic, there's always a cost. The result started perfectly, but ended up backfiring severely. I was so upset that I planned on trying it again. That's when the paranormal disturbances began. They started off very minor and cliché. Knocks on the walls, footsteps in the middle of the night, and night terrors. It happened so frequently that I managed to ignore it. Fast forward about 2 years. I was now with my husband at this time, but we weren't married yet. We fell on hard times financially, and for those reasons, we started living at my parents' house, the place where I performed all my witchcraft. Things started to take a turn for the worst, starting with the nightmares. It was absolutely terrifying and way too realistic. I dreamt that I was in my bedroom. I saw a strange light coming through my vanity mirror. I found myself sitting on my bedroom floor with my legs crossed, and my boyfriend was sitting on the edge of the bed. Neither of us spoke a word. We sat there in the same positions. Then suddenly my boyfriend asked me, "What's wrong with your face?" I got up from the floor and looked into the mirror. The light that was coming from the corner of the mirror made it hard to see at first, but when my eyes adjusted, I noticed my face starting to change. My normal face melted away and slowly turned demonic. That's when I lost control of my body. Before I knew it, I turned around and looked at my boyfriend and started laughing. It was a dark, deep, bone-chilling laugh. Then I began to levitate, pointing and laughing at my boyfriend, who sat there petrified. That's when I woke up, covered in sweat. I look over to my clock to see that it was 3:30 a.m. The next disturbance occurred not long after that. I would say about 6 months later. My boyfriend and I finally got on our feet. We bought a car and headed to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where we stayed with one of our friends. We both ended up getting great jobs. Cody, my boyfriend, was hired as a collision technician, and I got a job as a barista at Starbucks. While we were working and saving money, our schedules were completely different. Our roommate Kevin worked at a nursing home and would sometimes work at night and sleep in all day, or vice versa. Cody worked consistently from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday. I typically worked the same hours, but my days off didn't coincide with anyone else's. I tried getting as many weekends off as I could, but it wasn't always possible. The Starbucks I worked at was a little short-staffed, so I did a lot of overtime. One time, on a Thursday, I had the day off and I was home alone. My boyfriend and my roommate were both at work. I was the only female, living with 2 guys, so needless to say, I had a lot of cleaning to do. So I spent most of my day tidying up. It wasn't until around 1 p.m. that I finished. Since there wasn't much else to do, I was going to take a nap. I don't recall how long I was asleep, but as I laid there, I heard the front door of our apartment open, followed by footsteps. It sounded like Cody was home. I always kept the apartment door locked. Cody and Kevin were the only other ones with the keys. I kept listening as the footsteps approached the bedroom. I tried to get up to greet him, but I found myself unable to move or even open my eyes. I heard the bedroom door open and felt something sit at the edge of the bed. I then suddenly felt something grabbing my throat. The pressure made it difficult to breathe, and I was freaking out, completely paralyzed, unable to scream or speak. I began praying in my head, and slowly the entity loosened its grip, and I was finally able to wake up. I still felt pressure on my throat. I looked over to my clock to see that it was only 2:40 p.m. I was only asleep for about an hour and a half, and Cody didn't get home until almost 5. After I collected myself, I realized what happened to me wasn't a dream, and I didn't want to be home alone anymore. I didn't have the car, so I couldn't leave. I immediately called Cody at work, in tears, begging him to come home early. He said he would try his best, but he was in the middle of a big job and couldn't just walk away. So I had to sit in our apartment, alone, and just wait. I sat in the kitchen by the door until he called back and said that he was on his way. That was around 4 p.m. When he got home, I was still very upset, and I told him what happened. He did his best to comfort me. He believed me, which was a relief. He had experienced a few paranormal events himself when he was a kid. He said if it ever happened again when I was by myself, that I should pray. So from that point on, that's how I chose to deal with this. I was a Christian after all. Prayer helped at first, but soon, it wasn't enough. By this time, it was early 2017. Cody and I were married, and I found out that I was pregnant with our son. It was early into my pregnancy, the first trimester, so I slept a lot. I didn't really have morning sickness much, but I did get these awful headaches at night. Since I was pregnant, I wasn't allowed to take any over-the-counter medication to address it. So it was one of those nights where I felt a headache coming on. So I decided to go to bed. This was around 9 p.m. My husband was lying next to me, reading news articles on his phone. Not long after I fell asleep, I had a nightmare about a horned shadow figure attacking me, and I didn't have the strength to fight it off. It told me,
"We want the child. He belongs to us."
I fought back as best I could, and I began to pray out loud. When I would speak in my dream, I also spoke in my sleep, and my husband heard it. He told me that I wasn't speaking English. It didn't sound like it was my voice either. In fact, he said it sounded like several demonic voices speaking at once. I woke myself up, and the first thing I saw was Cody's terrified face. I tried my best to explain, but my emotions were all over the place. When I finally calmed down, I told him that even though what we heard come out of my mouth was utterly terrifying, what the figure in my dreams said was far worse, because it involved our unborn child. After that experience, I was extremely paranoid throughout my entire pregnancy. I prayed all the time and hoped it would be enough to repel the demonic forces. Nothing else happened until the night I went into labor. The doctors told me that my due date was October 11th, but it turned out to be much later. My son ended up being born on October 30th, 3 a.m. Not even kidding. He was healthy, and the delivery went well, but his birth date has always been troubling to me, especially after that dream. When my son turned 2, we left Pittsburgh and moved in with my parents in Ohio just before the pandemic. When COVID-19 hit, we both ended up losing our jobs and applied for temporary unemployment. We wanted to get the money together for our own apartment in the next town over. We moved in September of 2020, and we have been here ever since. When we got here, my son started hearing things from my bedroom closet. He sleeps with us, and he started talking about something called the noise. He said he saw the noise poking his head out from the closet one night. He said that the noise lived in the closet and had a weird head. He was only 3 at the time, so he could only be so descriptive. Now fast forward to the summer of 2021. One night I was up late, scrolling through YouTube videos. I'm subscribed to almost every creepypasta and horror channel there is on YouTube. My favorites being Uncle Unit, of course, Darkness Prevails, Undead Storyteller, Slumber Reads, and Mr. Creeps. Anyways, as I was listening, my son was on my lap, and I stumbled across a video by Mr. Creeps with a thumbnail photo being that of a goat-like demon head, and my son immediately pointed at my phone and said, "Look, Mommy, it's the noise." My heart sank into my stomach, and I immediately started asking him questions. I made him tell me what the noise looked like, and also asked him, "Does it talk to you? If so, what does it say?" My son replied that the noise only talked to him in his bad dreams, but he could never tell what he was saying. I found this alarming, to say the least. The next day, I called my uncle, who is a pastor at a local church. I asked him to come over and bless our home. After telling him everything that led up to my son seeing the entity, he said that he would come, but since he worked as a truck driver on the side, he would have to stop by on his next day off, which wouldn't be for another 8 days. As I anxiously waited, life remained the same. My son didn't really mention anything about the noise much at all, and we were doing a lot of praying. About 4 or 5 days after I called my uncle, all 3 of us were upstairs in our spare bedroom that we turned into a video game lounge. We called it the Chill Cave. Me and Cody were playing Left 4 Dead 2 on the mini couch, and our son was playing on the floor with his Minecraft toys. We were so focused on the game that we didn't realize that our son had gotten up and left the room. I thought maybe that he was going to go to the bathroom, since we trained him early. But the next thing we knew, we heard a tumbling sound. My heart was racing so fast, because I knew the moment it happened that my son had fallen down the stairs. My husband and I didn't think twice, and we ran out of the room. My son was at the bottom of the landing crying hysterically. We made sure he was okay and checked him out. By some miracle, he only had a couple of bruises on his elbow and knee. He did not hit his head or break any bones, thank God. He was okay, just more or less stunned. When we finally calmed him down and put ice on his elbow and knee, we sat him down and asked him what happened, wondering if he had tripped on something or slipped on the rug. To my surprise, he said, "It was the noise, hiding in the bathroom. I tried to run away and hide from him, and he pushed me." I was so full of fear and anger after hearing this. I had officially had enough of this shit. So I did some research on how to bless our home properly and went all out with religious symbols and imagery. We walked around our home as a family, praying and asking Jesus Christ to remove the dark spirit from our home. We haven't had anything else happen since that day. If anything else does occur, I'll be sure to keep you updated. Until then, any advice or prayers will be greatly appreciated so that this demonic force never returns.